Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Gift of Giving. My name is Stephen Murray, and I'm the host of the program. And although this program is focused mainly on Nevada nonprofits, foundations, and 501c3s, if you're listening from out of state, hope you will stay tuned because maybe some of the initiatives and programs that are implemented with these organizations can be used in your own states for your own philanthropic purposes. That applies to the United States and indeed other countries throughout the world if you're listening elsewhere. You might not be aware, but in October we have National Bullying Month and National Domestic Violence Month. Very, very serious subjects. And we're fortunate enough today to have the CEO of Nevada Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence, Elizabeth Abdul-Rahim. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for taking time out and spending it with us to explain a little bit about the importance of this subject. So, first of all, could you please give us a brief overview of the organization and when it was founded?
Sure. And thank you so much for having me here today. I really appreciate the opportunity. So back in 1980, a little bit before, in the late 70s, we had what was known as battered women's programs starting up around the country, right? We don't use that term anymore, but we did at that time. And at one point in the late 70s, a group of advocates came together in Washington, D.C., and realized that each of them were inventing their own wheel in their own program. And that was really not the best way to serve people, and that they had so many resources and so much knowledge that they needed to put it together. So what happened was the advocates started working together, sharing what they knew about what was working in their community, what was really helping survivors, what was getting people out of unsafe situations. And then we started state coalitions. The Nevada State Coalition started as the Nevada Network to End Domestic Violence, and it started in 1980. So in 2025, we will be having our 45th anniversary.
My,
Yeah, we're excited about that.
yes.
We started our coalition through 4 organizations across the state who were really working to start their own domestic violence, or at that time, battered women's shelters. And they came together and they pooled their resources so that they could be learning what was really working for victim survivors in Nevada. And over time, each state has developed their own domestic violence coalition and sexual assault coalitions that are federally recognized as a sign of how we pool and how we really support the people doing this ground level work. Here in Nevada, we became a dual coalition. So the sexual assault side joined our coalition in 2017. So we've been a dual coalition now for the last 7 years, but we really talk about making Nevada safer and talking about interpersonal violence and how can we make our communities and our state safer for everybody here in Nevada.
Cool. That's quite a history, and it's good that you're doing all this joining, so you're not doing duplicate. No, as you said,
Right.
Reinventing the wheel, to use your phrase, and a good one too. What was the catalyst that made you join the organization?
I always say that I came to Nevada. I just got here in 2023, in January of 2023. So I'm newer to Nevada.
Welcome.
And I came, thank you, from New York by way of Ohio. So I worked for 20 years in New York City and then in Columbus, Ohio, and always on issues of poverty, marginalization, and interpersonal violence. But direct service work, and I did direct service work for about 25 years, is triage work, right? It is really solving the symptoms of a situation, maybe rather than the root causes of the situation. And the reality is that what we really want are safer communities.
Yes.
And so this enables me to take my personal experience of direct service work and real crisis work and working with people in trauma and bring it here to support the 15 agencies who are our member agencies throughout the entire state, the advocates working in them, talk to our legislators, see how we can actually change, right? Change the systems, change our community conversations so that things are becoming safer, so that ideally we don't have to do as much triage work, or the work we do is faster, right? It's better, it's more effective, so that we're really getting in there, but that we're actually changing the dynamic of our community and the relationships that we're having, and they're becoming healthier. So we don't need as many shelter systems, right?
Nice.
And that's our goal, and sort of where I've come to at this point in my career.
Gotcha. And that makes perfect sense. And one thing, this isn't the taboo subject that it once was. You know,
Right.
there was a long time when nobody talked about domestic violence. Now it's people are more willing to come forward and say they've been victims or suffered from it. Would you say, in the light of the openness now, are the numbers increasing or decreasing in more cases getting reported?
So that is
Oh.
such a tricky question,
Mm-hmm.
because I always say in our business, no news is not good news, right? So as community awareness grows, and as people actually start to understand what healthy relationships look like, or what it looks like to know that there has been a unhealthy power and control dynamic in your intimate relationship, more people will report. We will actually see more numbers. And that is not a sign that organizations are not doing what they should. It is not a sign that advocates are not being effective. It is actually a sign of the opposite. It is a sign that we are making this conversation safer, that people are more willing to have it. And so we saw this a few years ago with the Me Too movement, right? Where more people were willing to say, I have experienced this, because that is the only way we're going to be able to take this out of the shadows and really change it, right? Is if people can just start talking about it. So here in Nevada, we have a lot of statistics. They're not great statistics. We are second in the country for states with rates of domestic violence. So 44% of women, citizens of our state, and 33% of men, citizens of our state, will experience domestic violence at some point in their lifetime. We are fifth in the country for rape, which means 70 people out of 100,000 will experience rape. It's important to understand that sexual assault continues to be the least reported crime. So when we look at our numbers, we know that we are looking at very, very low numbers, even as high as they feel to us. When we look from year to year, it's important that we think, are we just making more avenues for people to come forward? The other thing is that our definition of domestic violence has become so much more educated, right? We used to, when I talk about battered women's shelter, there was a picture people had of usually, more often than not, a sort of upper middle class white at-home mother, right, who went to the grocery store with her big sunglasses on to hide her black eye.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we thought of as domestic violence. And now we really understand that the power and control and the different forms of abuse that happen are so different from that one black
Yes.
eye that we see in the supermarket. So are we seeing larger numbers? Yes. Does that mean more people are in abusive relationships? I think that's very difficult for us to say.
Yes. Well, again, as I said, because people are talking about it much more as they weren't back then. So we just don't know whether it's really increasing. But I just wonder whether you'd seen a significant trajectory one way or the other. And it's, I shouldn't say it's nice, but it's important that you mention that there are 33% men, because men are often overlooked or forgotten in this discussion. It's normally considered that women are the victims of domestic violence, and it's not always. Sometimes it's as men as well.
No, and this thing that you're talking about the stereotypes we have about who gets abused and who is an abuser or a person who causes harm, is a really important thing for us to get to. Because we have moved in the coalition to talking a lot about power-based violence, and really understanding that the abuse that's happening in these relationships is about the power and control level. So even when we say, sometimes people would say gender-based violence, we move away from that. The reason it becomes gender-based is because of the traditional power dynamics around power. But to say, yes, when we don't acknowledge that men can be victims, right? Those men will not come forward. They will not get resources, and it will also change the resources that are available to them. When we don't acknowledge that same-sex relationships, right? You can have two people of the same gender, and the relationship still doesn't necessarily have to be healthy. and it's not always the physically larger person who's causing the harm. We need to really break out of that really sort of easy stereotypical thinking that we have fallen into.
A good point, and a good point to stop and pause and take a little sponsorship break. Stay with us. Please stay with us, everyone. We're going to take a brief sponsorship break. Please listen to what Pacific Coast Capital has to say. We'll be right back.
Introducing Pacific Coast Capital, your partner in finance. We provide financing for your business. Speed, flexibility, and creativity are the foundation of our service. We'll help you navigate through change and opportunities. Our 90-plus years of experience ensures quick turnaround on loan decisions. Ride the wave to prosperity with us. Ready for new funding? Visit our website today at pacificcoastcap.com.
Welcome back to the program, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And I'd like to thank again Pacific Coast Capital for sponsoring this program. And thank you, Elizabeth Abdul-Rahim, for being with us today from Nevada Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence. Very, very needed organization, no question about it. Now, we need to make clear to the viewers that you are not a shelter. You are a resource center primarily. And before we get into the resources you provide, I think there are a couple of hotlines that we need to sort of put out on the program here. First of all, the national hotline. Could you just talk a little bit about that? Where is the national hotline? And
so the national hotline is run by a domestic violence resource agency that really connects people with their local agencies.
Okay.
So you call in and you say, this is where I'm calling from, and these are the situations that are happening to me, and they will connect you to a local advocate. The other thing that they can do is connect you to an advocate in the safe community that you hope to go to. Many people in domestic violence are looking to relocate, and they need to actually connect up with an advocate, not where they are right this minute, but where they intend to be tomorrow or next week.
Perfect. What a great resource that is too. And the rape abuse hotline.
Yes. So RAIN, many people are aware of RAIN. It's the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. They do amazing work. They will do on-the-phone counseling as well as connecting people, again, to their local resource. And they are just invaluable when it comes to rape and sexual assault for all ages.
Good grief. And Strong Hearts Native Help Hotline. Very important one too.
One of the scariest things that we know about Indigenous communities and Indigenous women are the only racial and ethnic group of women more likely to be assaulted by someone outside of their community than within their community. So this is a really interesting dynamic, and part of it, it has to do with our colonial past, right? And what people felt they could do to Indigenous people and Indigenous women's bodies in particular, right? And it is really important that Indigenous women and Indigenous victims of all genders get culturally appropriate care. There are also very specific jurisdictional problems, right? When we talk about people on tribal lands and who is taking over that. So it is really important that our Indigenous advocates be uniquely culturally competent, and that's what this hotline does.
What a marvelous hotline that is.
Yeah.
That's going to be a real savior for a lot of people. And then we have the SAGE hotline. That's the last one I think that we need to put out there.
So we work with, right now we're doing a series of trainings around Nevada called Ending Abuse in Later Life. What we know, and it is way too common, right, that we think that at some age people stop being sexual beings. That is not true. It's also not true that older people aren't ripe for abuse of all forms. And it is really important that we understand this specific vulnerability that can happen as we age, and that we have places that are available for people who might often be ashamed, feel it is their fault, say, I've never been this sort of person, how could this happen to me? And so having really specific programs available for people as they're older and they find themselves in possibly a situation of abuse is crucial.
Gosh. Yes. We tend not to think about that. As you said, that's a missing link in a lot of our minds, I think. Let's talk a little bit. I see you have a program or a resource, Awareness Preventing Sexual Violence Against People with Disabilities. That seems so heinous, but I'm sure it is. Would you like to talk a little bit about that resource? And
So I think this is some of what we talked about already with some of our specific communities, right? Is that as people are more marginalized, they are more open to abuse. The likelihood, right? Abuse happens in shadows. And it happens when we don't listen to people and when we don't lift up their voices and we don't look for their voices. And so often, especially for people with developmental disabilities, we don't listen to them. We do not allow them to speak for themselves. We make excuses that they don't really understand what has happened or things like that. And so we have worked on the Believe My Truth campaign, which is how can we really listen to these experiences, because we know that this marginalized experience causes heightened opportunities for abuse. The other thing is because we are not often thinking of people with developmental disabilities as full humans, right? That experience all of the complexities of
Yes.
life. We think if we don't talk to them about sex and sexuality, they just won't want to have sex. And
yes,
that is just an unrealistic expectation.
Yes.
We know that that's not true, right? They're going through hormones and puberty and all of the stages that all the rest of us are. So we also do a lot of educating with educators about sexuality education and healthy relationship education for people with developmental disabilities. And what we say is there's nothing special about it except that they have the right to the same information that we would give to everybody, and to be able to talk to people, and that we shouldn't just say, just don't do that,
Mhm.
because that is denying their full humanity. And so really embracing people's full humanity and say, unfortunately, in humanity, there are also dangerous places that we need to make sure that you can recognize so that you know to report. And that when you report, somebody is there to believe you. And that's really what we work on in our campaign.
Well, following on from that, it's a very important point to say we need to listen to people with disabilities. As it relates to the community, if we're in conversation with somebody with disabilities and we really are listening and we find out that they are have been sexually abused or in some way or other, or emotionally abused, what should the community do? Should they reach out to you, or
They are
what
welcome
should
to reach
the
out to us.
average individual, the layman out there that
Right.
encounters, and actually not just people with disabilities, but anybody, if they see somebody who has been domestically abused, should they talk to them individually or recommend that they speak to you, or should they do something practical and tangible?
So this is probably the most common question I get, which is, what can I do?
Mhm.
And I think there are a lot of things that we can do, and they are not as hard as you think they are. Because people don't do it because it's scary, right? But I think back to times that community members have screened me for domestic violence, right? Times that I've shown up at a yoga class with big bruises on my back that I maybe didn't even know were there. And my instructor came to me while making an adjustment and said, "Are you safe?" Right? So the first thing we do is we don't assume we know what's going on, but we don't ignore it. We say, "Are you safe? Are you okay? Do you need my help in this space?" Right? Because survivors need voice and choice. When we think of this as power and control, that somebody has taken power over your body and that they are controlling you, the first thing I need to do as somebody who's coming in and wants to intersect that is give you power back, right? And allow you to make that decision. So it could be that I was in an abusive relationship and this person came to me and said, "Are you safe?" And I said, "Oh, yes, I'm safe, I'm safe, I'm safe." But they have let me know that they are open for that conversation. So I can go home and say, am I safe? Is that really an okay thing? And if I'm not, is this a person that I can talk to? Do I go to that yoga center without my partner? And I could speak with this person, right? So the first thing is to really acknowledge and say, are you okay? If somebody needs immediate medical care, of course, we would get them immediate medical care, right? There are forensic exams that need to happen. We need to be very careful about some lethality things. Non-fatal strangulation is one of our biggest lethality things that says somebody will come back and possibly this is going to be a lethal situation. So if anybody has restricted your breathing in any way, and that doesn't necessarily look like traditional strangling, there might not be anything, you want to say, have they restricted your breathing? Was your head hurt? Did you ever get your head hit? Those things we want to go and get immediate medical assistance on, right? But starting just with the like, are you safe? And then we can reach out and then we can work on it together, or then we can safety plan together.
Good breaking point right there. Very valid points. And thanks for sharing that information because that's very important. When we come back there's a couple of other things that we definitely need to talk about. We need to talk about certainly the financial impact of some of these cases. Very important. We're going to take another sponsorship break, and please listen to messages from Firelight Barn and Welcome back, everyone, and thank you to our sponsors for sponsoring this program, and thank you again to Elizabeth Abdul-Rahim for being with us today. And let's talk a little bit. You've mentioned before about that sometimes the financial abuse is a prominent form of domestic violence. Could you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, and financial abuse isn't something that people readily think about, right? We usually think about the physical abuse and the emotional abuse.
Yes.
And the reality is that emotional abuse happens in 100% of our domestic violence situations. Physical abuse happens in about 98% of them, and financial abuse actually happens in 99%.
My goodness.
So this is a really interesting thing to think about that we don't always think about, which is when people keep you financially hostage. And there are a lot of ways that financial abuse finds itself. One is that not allowing the victim to work, right? Not allowing the victim to work. We also see this when people continually have somebody pregnant so that they have to be always pregnant or caring for very young children. So they can't sort of be building up their work history. They have not allowed them to go to school, right? All of that is part of financial abuse. We also see running up their credit cards, getting credit cards in their names that they're not aware of, taking control of their money and their finances so that they don't have enough money to leave, right? Because the stability of leaving, or we have somebody who has left a home, they have no work history, they have nothing that's ever been in their own name, they have no credit, they might have no evictions on their record, things that they did not rack up that we know are going to be incredibly difficult to move forward from. And then we talk about something called the economic ripple effect of abuse, which is the abuser has left, but the person, the victim, right, is still there with these incredibly high credit card bills, and those people are now threatening them. These incredibly eviction spaces, or we're just about to lose our house and the landlord is threatening them, right? And so the expenses and now the system, right, the community becomes the abuser. And we call that the ripple effect of financial abuse. And that is what makes it so incredibly difficult for people to actually create, put their feet solidly on the ground again, but also to create solid foundations for their children to actually be breaking this cycle. And that's something we need to look at very carefully, and lots of systems participate in it, right? We have high court costs. We have the costs of attorneys. We have all of these things that are now being put upon somebody who was not allowed to make their own decisions over the last who knows how many years, but is now being held legally and financially responsible for the abuse that they endured. And that's something that requires a lot more support. And we need to, as communities, be willing to just, quite frankly, give people money without a lot of strings attached, trusting them to make intelligent decisions and not say, oh, you clearly can't make them. You have all this past, right? But say, we're giving you the power back. And if you tell me what you need is $500 out of this situation, I will believe you.
Now, those some of the practical solutions that you offer to people when they reach out to you, and good solutions and good suggestions, and I'm sure you've helped hundreds, if not thousands, of people since the inception of the program.
Well, we're not a direct service program. The one place where we do provide direct service is in financial assistance.
Mhm.
So a lot of our smaller programs don't have the ability to provide direct financial assistance to victims, and they can apply to us for direct financial assistance, and that's one of the things that we do provide.
Yes. Well, there's a lot more resources on your website too. We've talked about some of them, but you've got a whole array. So later on, we will be talking about giving out your website information where people can go get more information. Would like to talk a little bit about, before we close, the disparate impact in communities. And you mentioned that during the break too. So can we talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So one of the things we know, right, is the communities of color and marginalized communities experience abuse and experience violence at a much higher rate. However, I think it's important for us to understand that 80% of the people who report sexual assault are cisgendered white women. Now, when we look at that disconnect, right, and we understand that Black women are 4 to 5 times more likely than white women to experience sexual assault, but not report it. When we say what we just said, that Indigenous women are 2 to 3 times more likely than any other race and ethnicity to experience sexual assault. And yet the people reporting are white women. And that is because who historically has felt that they deserve to be believed? Who historically has expected the law enforcement system to work for them? And we have to think about what spaces are we making? What avenues are we making to make it safe for other people to report? Other genders, other races, other ethnicities, other religions, right? For people to come forward and feel safe, to feel believed. There is a campaign that you can go to. It's called Start by Believing. I believe it says startbybelieving.org, where you can make a pledge that says, I will start by believing. Whoever comes to me and tells me of their abuse or their assault, I will believe them. I will not ask them why they were there. I will not ask them why they don't just leave. I will not ask them what they were wearing. I will believe them. And that is so incredibly important. But we also have to look realistically, honestly, at these equity disparities. And that's why all of our prevention work at the Coalition focuses on economic justice and equity. Where are we seeing equity gaps? When we can close those gaps, we will make our communities safer for everyone.
Gotcha. You come up with some amazing solutions here. I sincerely hope that anybody who's viewing out there, if you know of anybody who is subject to domestic violence in any shape or form, that you will share this program with them so they can watch it. And we're going to ask you too for the name of your website, where people can go, because there's a wealth of information in addition to what you've given us here today. Before we ask you to give out the information, what volunteer opportunities are there within are you always looking for volunteers? Do you need volunteers?
So we do limited volunteering, and most of our volunteering is about our policy work. We do a lot of policy work, both in Carson City here in Nevada, as well as in Washington, D.C., and asking people to reach out and really, first of all, fund these programs. Fund the Violence Against Women Act, fund the Victims of Crime Act, right? Ask your legislators to get behind that. This is not a partisan issue. We need to put resources into the people who have been harmed and are vulnerable in our communities. And then we also work on safer laws. So we work on workforce protection for victims and things like that. That's where we mostly engage volunteers. We also encourage people to reach out to your local program. Local programs are where you find what, and they will tell you what they most need. Is it a story hour for the kids in shelter who can just feel normal? Is it bringing your dog into the kids in shelter so that they can play with somebody, right? Is it not being in shelter at all, but helping with, a lot of our programs will have like clothing closets and things like that. So I encourage you to reach out to your local program and figure out what is being needed right there, because your eyes will be open when you start to see face to face what's happening in your community.
Great, great. And you mentioned about reaching out to legislatures and state or federal. Do you get any funding from the state? Where do you get your funding from?
Our funding comes in a number of ways. Much of it is government grants. Most of them are federal grants, either that came directly to us or have come through the state. Here in Nevada, we're in one of a handful of states that has no line item in our budget for domestic or sexual violence. We do receive money, we do not as the coalition, but our member programs receive money from a marriage license fund. So there's $50 of every marriage license goes to 75% of it to domestic violence agencies and 25% of it to sexual assault agencies around our state. And that is the only state money that we put forth. And I would just remind us that budgets are the clearest sense of our values. So the fact that it's not in our state budget is really very, very telling, and something that we want to really work with our legislators on. But that's our primary funding. We're always looking to diversify. We did a big fundraiser that we were very proud of. We're about to have our, soon we will have a holiday campaign to ask people to support our work moving forward.
Well, let's hope that some of our viewers will see that, check out your website and learn when your holiday fundraiser is, and we wish you lots of success with that. Would you care to give out your website and phone number where people can reach out to you?
Absolutely. I encourage you to go to our website for the Nevada Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence. It's NCEDSV.org. There you can find any of our direct phone numbers. You can also find a lot of resources, a lot of toolkits. We have a lot of trainings going on all the time that are open to the general public as well as advocates specifically. So I encourage you to go there, really go through that wealth of resources.
Elizabeth, thank you for what you and your team are doing here in the state of Nevada, in your locations, Reno and here in Las Vegas and in the rural communities. Appreciate everything that you're doing to stomp this out. And hopefully in the Awareness Month, October, for domestic violence, hopefully you've raised some awareness today. I'm sure you have. So thank you again for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. And I'd like to thank our show's producer, John Stahl, for producing this program and for allowing me to host this program too. He's also the station owner. A special thanks to our sponsors, Pacific Coast Capital, Firelight Barn, and my business partner, Ralph Champion. You'll hear his message right at the end of this program. And I'd also finally, of course, last but not least, thank you, the viewers, for tuning in. We hope you find this program has been informative and that you will share with anybody you know who could benefit from the services of the Nevada Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence. If you have any comments or questions, please reach out to me, Stephen at thegiftofgiving.vegas. And hopefully you will join us again next week. In the meantime, stay safe, be kind to one another, and have a good week. Bye for now.
Mr. R.J. Champion is proud to sponsor WWDBTV's series, The Gift of Giving, and wishes the program much success. Congratulations and gratitude to the featured guests and the organizations they represent. Our community is well served by your tireless efforts to make Nevada a better state for all its residents.